Aliens. Extraterrestrial biological entities. The internet is flooded with thousands of pictures and videos of saucer or cigar-shaped crafts and strange lights in the sky. Whether real or fake, even stranger are the stories and claims of people being taken aboard these crafts and being experimented on in various ways. I've come up with a list of 5 such claims for this video. The unique experience of Betty Andreasson is one of the most interesting and well-documented cases of UFO abduction to take place in the United States during the 1960s, with many researchers still working to find answers to this day. On January 25, 1967, in South Ashburnham, Massachusetts, Betty Andreasson, with her 7 children along with her parents, would have an experience that would change their lives forever. At around 6:30 p.m., the lights in the house began to flicker before a very strong, red beam of light began to shine through the kitchen window. Looking out the window to find the source, Betty's father was greeted with the image of 5 small beings floating towards the house. Without touching anything, the beings floated right through the front door, and the entire family was instantly put into a state of suspended animation. They began to communicate with Betty telepathically, and she claimed to have gotten a very warm and friendly feeling from the beings. There were 5 in total. 4 of them were about 4 feet tall, with large heads and wide eyes, almost no ears or nose, and a slit for a mouth. The 5th being was about a foot taller. They wore blue jumpsuits, with birds on the sleeves and boots. They even released one of her children from the suspended state, to show they weren't being harmed, after which they took Betty to a saucer-shaped craft before transporting her to an even larger one. It was there where she was subjected to a strange experiment that began to cause her pain before entering a euphoric, religious-type experience. Shortly after, she was returned to her home, where her family was still in a suspended state. The beings released them very quickly and left. Betty, being a devoted Christian woman, thought of the night as a religious experience for many years, before slowly beginning to see it as more alien. 8 years later, she would reach out to Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who would eventually thoroughly investigate her case. She was given a character reference check, 2 lie detector tests, a psychiatric review, and 14 sessions of regressive hypnosis. His result would later be published in a 528-page account of the case. On October 16, 1957, Antonio Villas-Boas, a 23-year-old man from Brazil, was in the middle of a hard day's work, spending the day plowing a field on his family's farm. While plowing, his tractor started acting strangely before the engine cut off completely. While this was happening, a large craft shining with purple lights descended from the clouds and landed close by. Strange beings resembling humans exited the craft and began to make their way towards Antonio. They easily led him into a ship, where they brought him into a room. There, they stripped him before covering his whole body in a strange liquid. Afterwards, they took a blood sample and left Antonio alone in the room to wait. After what he thought was quite a long time, a very beautiful woman entered the room. When she entered, she was completely naked, and Antonio began to find her irresistible. Almost immediately, he had sex with the woman, and while doing so, she began to growl and snarl like an animal. He had sex with the woman twice, and afterwards she turned to him and smiled, before pointing to her stomach and then to the sky. Later, he was able to tour the entire ship before being released. Antonio would later go on to become a very successful lawyer. It was a warm summer night on August 26, 1978, when four men, twin brothers Jack and Jim Weiner, and friends Charlie Foltz and Chuck Rack, decided to take a canoeing trip through the Allagash Waterway in Maine. The four set up camp late in the evening and decided to try their luck at some night fishing, building a very large fire to guide their way back. While fishing, they noticed a bright light hovering just above the tree line to the south. Charlie Foltz raised a flashlight and shined it at the object. They could now see that it was massive, and it began to move silently toward them. In a panic, the men began to paddle as fast as they could back to the bank. As they paddled, a beam of light shot out of the craft that completely engulfed them and the canoe. Their next clear memory is that of standing on the bank once again, watching the craft disappear into the sky. They looked around at each other, wondering what had taken place, before they realized the large fire they built had already burned out when they had built it to last for at least a few hours. Without much to say, the men packed their things and decided to head home. Some time would pass before the four men began to have nightmares and flashbacks of traumatizing things they had experienced but could not remember. Of small beings with large glowing eyes and small insect-like hands. With the help of a hypnotist, Anthony Constantino, the four men underwent regressive hypnosis therapy to recall just what had happened to them. Through the sessions, many hazy memories began to become clear, and all four accounts were very consistent. All four men had been abducted and subjected to experimentation, having skin and fluid samples taken from their bodies by beings whose features were still hazy in their memories. All four men passed the lie detector test, and the case has become one of the most well-documented alien abduction cases to date. The abduction experiences of Whitley Strieber began on a snowy night on December 26, 1985, at his cabin in upstate New York. In the late hours of the night, at around 1 a.m., Strieber awoke to strange noises he could hear in the distance. Laying in bed, listening, he began to think an intruder had made it past his newly installed security system. Looking up, he was surprised to see the face of a strange being poking through his doorway. That was his last clear memory, and the next thing he remembered was being in the woods outside of his cabin, without the proper clothing. After some time of being bothered by the bits and pieces of what he could remember from that night, he sought the help of Dr. Donald F. Klein and underwent regressive hypnosis therapy. Under hypnosis, he recalled what had happened to him on that night. Strieber remembered seeing the small gray being in his room and being lifted up and floating out the window into a strange craft. There he was subjected to medical experimentation by four different beings. One was very thin and fragile-looking, with piercing black slanted eyes, while another fragile-looking being had black rounded eyes. The other two were very short, with one being very stocky and the other looking more like a robot. He recalled them sticking a large needle through his skull and into his brain, and taking different blood samples from his fingers. They also inserted a large, unknown object into his rectum. After the therapy, Dr. Klein diagnosed Strieber with temporal lobe epilepsy, a disorder that can cause hallucinations, but he did not accept the diagnosis, and already being a successful author, published a non-fiction account of his experience titled Communion, which quickly rose to become a bestseller. The events with what he would begin to call the Visitors would continue for many years, and he would go on to become a well-known figure in the UFO community, publishing several more books after the success of his first. In the early evening hours on August 7, 1968, at the Buff Ledge All-Girls Summer Camp, located on Lake Champlain just north of Burlington, Vermont, two camp employees, 19-year-old Janet Cornell and 16-year-old Michael Lapp, were enjoying some time off, taking in the sunset from a camp dock when they noticed something in the sky. As the sun was setting, the two saw a small but bright light appear in the sky, which they at first mistaken for the planet Venus. The light then began to fall and started moving closer to Michael and Janet. As the light grew larger, 3 smaller lights emerged from under it before it disappeared into the sky above. The 3 lights began performing strange and impossible maneuvers, such as sharp zigzags without a loss in speed, and very fast loops before forming a triangle and moving directly towards the lake. 2 of the objects pulled back, leaving the other to fly directly over the 2 teenagers, before disappearing straight up into the air and returning seconds later. The strange craft then tilted and shot straight into the water and stayed under for a few minutes before re-emerging. Through a transparent dome on the top of the craft, Michael was able to recall seeing 2 small, unidentified beings with big, completely bald heads, unusually long necks, and very large eyes. The craft was now hovering directly above them and shot a bright beam at the 2, which they later said had a liquid feel to it. Michael recalled being overcome with fear and screaming that they didn't want to go, before again finding himself and Janet staring at the object from a distance, before it disappeared almost like nothing had happened, except for now the sky was completely black. After that, it would be at least 10 years before either of them would talk about the experience. Following a few years of troubling nightmares, Michael decided to contact the Center for UFO Studies. The investigator assigned to his case suggested regressive hypnosis therapy, and while undergoing the therapy, both Michael and Janet recalled very specific details. Michael remembered being lifted into a craft and seeing Janet on an examination table. The small beings were shining lights into her eyes and taking fluid from her body, and scraping her skin with some tool. And he claims they told him their mission was to make life like theirs. In this video, I only shared 5 of the cases that I found the most interesting, but there are literally thousands more reported sightings and abduction claims to learn about with just a quick search. I'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe, and look out for the next video.